From the Hooray for Higher Education desk comes the following story. Cornell University professor Russell Rickford did himself a bit of pro-Hamas Twitter tweeting this weekend. Is it still called tweeting? As much as I hate that word, I flat out refuse to say Xing. Bridge too far, not going to do it. But Professor Rickford, it seems, was very, very pleased with the Hamas killing spree. He called it energizing. He said, I was exhilarated. It's almost like this man gets some sort of sexual pleasure from the mass murder of women and children. And he's not the first idiot college professor, because, of course, he's not, to try and draw attention to himself by celebrating the killing and dismembering of the innocent and the defenseless. Some idiot professor at Penn University, home of the Penn Biden Center for Big Giant Bags of Cash from China, also did this same song and dance, and so did some other jackass at Columbia, and they both got similarly internet famous because that was the whole point of the exercise. But in that last case, there at least now is a petition with upwards of 50,000 signatures calling for that dude's ass to get fired for whatever that is worth, likely not very much. Getting a tenured university professor fired is about as easy as fighting Chris Christie and J.B. Pritzker for the world's last box of jelly donuts. But here, let's let Professor Rickford's inspiring words speak for themselves. It wasn't actually a spate of Twitter tweeting that he did. I think I misspoke a moment ago. But he spoke at a pro-Hamas campus rally, because, of course, there was a pro-Hamas campus rally, with a bullhorn, no less, because when you want to look like a real, true, badass revolutionary, even when you have access to a fully functional PA system, bring a megaphone with you anyway, because it just looks that much cooler. And he had a friend filming the whole thing so that he could upload it onto his own Twitter page, Twitter feed, whatever the bloody hell it's called. I just wanted to get that disclaimer out there, because, ladies and gentlemen, while this might be a fake news show, it takes so little effort to exercise more journalistic rigor than the real fake news shows do that we want to go that extra mile and do it for you, the audience. But without any further ado, Professor Rickford and his megaphone spake thusly, quote, Hamas has shifted the balance of power. Hamas has punctured the illusion of invincibility. That's what they've done. You don't have to be a Hamas supporter to recognize that. Hamas has changed the terms of the debate. End quote. And if you didn't know what this guy was talking about, you might think he was discussing like a quarterback who had a great game last weekend. Not necessarily babies getting their heads cut off, but I digress. Oh, also, there is more. Quote, and in those first few hours, even as horrific acts were being carried out, many of which we didn't learn about until later. Covering your ass there, Professor, are we a little bit, huh? There are many Gazans of goodwill, many Palestinians of conscience who abhor violence, as do you, as do I, who abhor the targeting of civilians, as do you, as do I, who were able to breathe. They were able to breathe for the first time in years. It was exhilarating. It was energizing. And if they weren't exhilarated by this challenge to the monopoly of violence, by this shifting of the balance of power, then they would not be human. I was exhilarated. End quote. Dude? First of all, I like how you used the word exhilarated not once, but twice, to describe the way this ethnic cleansing murder spree made you feel. And I especially like how you did it immediately after giving that half-hearted, mealy-mouthed disclaimer about how you so totally don't approve of violent acts or the targeting of civilians. Because I got a pro tip for you here, Professor. People don't use words like exhilarating to describe things that they find horrific and appalling. In fact, exhilarating is a word that strongly implies approval by virtue of its very usage. Nobody says, that car crash was exhilarating. I'm glad I wasn't badly hurt. Nobody said, that was the most exhilarating picture of the year after they walked out of Schindler's List. Nobody says, I had an exhilarating time at my IRS tax audit. Now, I realize, my dear Professor Rickford, that you are the one with all the fancy college degrees, and I myself am not. So clearly you are my intellectual superior. But take these words of advice for what you will. Just a helpful tip from some poor benighted bumpkin out here in flyover country, who isn't culturally erudite enough to find baby murder as exhilarating as I perhaps ought to. Maybe I just need to check my white privilege at the door. Jim Eagle, will you please hit the music while I go flagellate myself? From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where if I told you every one of those pro-Hamas college professor idiots went straight from grad student to faculty member, and thus has spent his entire adult life cloistered in the intellectual echo chamber of the modern university campus, would you be surprised? Of course you wouldn't be surprised. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And I've been rather desperate to do a history episode lately, and today I think provides us with a good opportunity for doing just that, for it was 242 years ago today, or yesterday by the time you're watching this, unless you're a channel member, Wednesday, 17 October 1781, that the United States of America first got into the win column in the only sport that matters, namely war. On that date, General Lord Cornwallis surrendered his army to General George Washington. Actually, no, he didn't, but more on that in a moment. Ending the siege of Yorktown 5 days before the Royal Navy could arrive to assist in Cornwallis's defense, and thus, as a practical matter, was brought to a close the armed hostilities phase in the War of American Independence. It was a further 2 years before the Treaty of Paris was concluded and ratified, so technically the state of war doesn't end until the latter part of 1783. But once Cornwallis had done the honorable thing and surrendered his sword to Washington, actually he didn't do that, but more on that in a moment, the thing was all pretty much over, and everybody knew it. The last British field army had been well and truly vanquished. The only place that the British still held was New York City. And we could have thrown their asses out, but hey, we're all gentlemen here, and a gentleman is magnanimous in victory, as he also ought to be in defeat. But more on Lord Cornwallis in a moment. And besides, if we let you guys use the port facilities in New York, then it'll be that much easier and more convenient to pack up all your shit and get the hell off our continent. We understand how difficult it must be, being the mightiest superpower in the history of the world and getting beaten so decisively, thrown out of the entire New World by a ragtag band of plucky rebels who aren't even gentlemen enough to abide by the accepted rules of war. We know this must be a hell of a lot to take, and with that in mind, we want to help make your final ignominious exit from our homeland just as comfortable and convenient as we can. Thanks for visiting. We hope you all come back real soon. But back to Lord Cornwallis. He had to know that he was pretty much fucked. He's surrounded on land on 3 sides by the Americans, and on the sea side he is blockaded in by the French Navy. He knows the Royal Navy has sent a flotilla down from New York to attempt his relief. But even if they arrive in time, it may not make much of a difference in the final analysis. The net result might just be the senseless effusion of blood for no real purpose at all. Besides, says Cornwallis, we've already run out of provisions. My men are subsisting on rats and mice, which means they're not in very effective fighting shape. And even if we did try to fight, we are so starved for ammunition we could only defend the town for maybe half a day at best. So it doesn't take a whole lot of rocket surgery calculations for our man Cornwallis to figure out that, yeah, we're kind of screwed. I think we're going to have to surrender to these filthy, unwashed rebels, which means I need to contact the enemy commander so that we might meet and discuss terms. Get my aide-de-camp in here at once. I need to draft a dispatch. All right, you ready? Write this down. To Mr. George Washington, in command of the American forces, I should like to meet, yada, 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 discuss terms, yada, yada, yada. Sincerely, Charles, Lord Cornwallis, commanding his enemies, his Majesty's forces, etc., etc. Good. Now you go to the rebel camp and deliver my message at once. An hour goes by, a second hour goes by. Cornwallis starts getting worried. I hope they haven't executed my aide-de-camp, he said. It seems like such a nice young chap. Eventually, though, the young man turns back up, but there is still a problem. He's still carrying the dispatch to Washington, and it has not been opened. Cornwallis is flummoxed. He demands of the aide-de-camp, what's happened here? Have you not been to the enemy camp? No, sir, I went down there just like you told me, but they wouldn't accept the message because they said there is no Mr. George Washington there. Damn, says Cornwallis, I was afraid of this. Afraid of what? Inquires the aide-de-camp. Why don't you just address the damn thing to General Washington instead of Mr. Washington and be done with it? Cornwallis nearly goes apoplectic at this suggestion. I can't do that, you idiot. Are you mad? All right, sir, I'm going to need you to walk me through this then. Why can't you just call him General? Because, you nincompoop, if I call him General Washington, that means I am acknowledging that he's a general and not a British Army deserter who holds the permanent rank of Lieutenant Colonel. If I call him General Washington, that means I am acknowledging that the force he leads is an army and not a band of rebel insurgents. And if I acknowledge that he is a general who is leading an army, then by extension I am also acknowledging that the rebel colonies are actually a sovereign nation, just like they claim to be. And such decisions, dear boy, are well and truly above my pay grade and yours. Oh, I see, says the aide-de-camp. So if you can't call him General and he won't read the message if you just call him Mister, what options does that leave open to us? I've got it, says Cornwallis. Are you ready? Write this down. To George Washington, Esquire. An hour goes by. Another hour. Cornwallis paces back and forth in his tent. Then the aide-de-camp turns back up, bearing a message that looks just as unopened as the first one did. Sorry, sir, I feel like we're going in the wrong direction here, because these guys were actually more offended by Esquire than they were by Mister. Now, please forgive me for speaking out of turn here, but I feel like if you want to complete this surrender, you might just have to get over it and call the dude General. Nope. I'm not going to do any such thing, says Cornwallis. Are you ready? Write this down. To the officer commanding the American forces. Sorry, sir, they said no again. They said you're going to have to be more specific about who the message is for. Fine then. Are you ready? Write this down. To the officer commanding the French forces, we would be ever so grateful if you could pass this message to your colleague, the American commander. Sorry, sir, they said no again. The French commander says he's got no authority to pass your request to the American commander. I see. They're playing 4D chess here, aren't they, says Cornwallis. But I shan't let these scoundrels defeat me in a battle of military protocol, damn your eyes. You ready? Write this down. To the aide-de-camp of the officer commanding the American forces. Hello, I am the aide-de-camp of the British commander. If I were to hand you his sword, would you be nice enough to pass it along to your boss? By this time, nearly an entire day has been wasted just in the act of attempting to contact the enemy commander to arrange a discussion of surrender terms. But Washington, he finally relents just a little bit. He lets Cornwallis's aide-de-camp come in and discuss terms with his own aide-de-camp, and they come up with quite an unwieldy document, 14 articles in length, and here it is, Article 1, quote, the garrisons of Yorktown and Gloucester, including the officers and seamen of His Britannic Majesty's ships, as well as other mariners, to surrender themselves as prisoners of war to the combined forces of America and France. Article 2, the artillery, arms, accoutrements, military chest, and public stores of every denomination shall be delivered unimpaired to the heads of departments appointed to receive them. Article 3. At 12 o'clock this day, the 2 redoubts on the left flank of Yorktown to be delivered, the one to a detachment of American infantry, the other to a detachment of French grenadiers. Article 4. Officers are to retain their sidearms, both officers and soldiers to keep their private property of every kind, and no part of their baggage or papers to be at any time subject to search or inspection. Article 5. The soldiers to be kept in Virginia, Maryland, or Pennsylvania, and as much by regiments as possible, and supplied with the same rations of provisions as are allowed to soldiers in the service of America. Article 6. The general, staff, and other officers not employed as mentioned in the above articles, and who choose it, shall be permitted to go on parole to Europe, to New York, or to any other American maritime posts at present in the possession of the American forces at their own option. Article 7. Officers to be allowed to keep soldiers as servants, according to the common practice of the service. Servants, not soldiers, are not to be considered as prisoners and are to be allowed to attend their masters. Article 8. The Bonetta sloop of war to be equipped and navigated by its present captain and crew and left entirely at the disposal of Lord Cornwallis from the hour that the capitulation is signed, to receive an aide-de-camp to carry dispatches to Sir Henry Clinton and such soldiers as he may think proper to send to New York, to be permitted to sail without examination. Article 9. The traders are to preserve their property and to be allowed 3 months to dispose of or remove them, and those traders are not to be considered as prisoners of war. Article 10. Natives or inhabitants of different parts of this country at present in Yorktown or Gloucester are not to be punished on account of having joined the British Army. Article 11. Proper hospitals to be furnished for the sick and wounded. They are to be attended by their own surgeons on parole, and they are to be furnished with medicines and stores from the American hospitals. Article 12. Wagons to be furnished to carry the baggage of the officers attending the soldiers, and to surgeons when traveling on account of the sick, attending the hospitals at public expense. Article 13. The shipping and boats in the 2 harbors with all their stores, guns, tackling, and apparel shall be delivered up in their present state to an officer of the Navy appointed to take possession of them, previously unloading the private property, part of which had been on board for the security during the siege. Article 14. No article of capitulation to be infringed on pretense of reprisals, and if there be any doubtful expressions in it, they are to be interpreted according to the common meaning and acceptation of the words. Done at Yorktown in Virginia, 19 October 1781, end quote. And the document has Cornwallis's signature on it, but when it came time for the capitulation ceremony, he didn't bother showing up. So humiliated was he by Washington's refusal to read his improperly addressed messages. So, in one of the pussiest douchebag moves in the history of armed conflict, Cornwallis hands his sword to his aide-de-camp, says, "Go give this to Mr. Washington or Washington Esquire or whoever the hell he is." But by this time, Cornwallis has made such a complete fool of himself, nobody even wants to accept his sword. Washington won't take it. Lafayette won't take it. None of the other generals will take it. So eventually, the ceremonial surrender is done by a lieutenant handing a general's sword to another lieutenant. And Washington is so annoyed by all of this ridiculous douchebaggery, he goes back on his word a little bit. He says, "Look, I know I said you guys could march out of the town with your banners waving and your bayonets fixed and all that good stuff. The courtesies that one normally extends to one's vanquished foe. But you know what? Fuck that. Your commander acted like a real dickhead. So you all are going to march out with your banners furled and your arms shouldered because I said so, because I'm George freaking Washington, bitches. General George Washington to you. And don't you be forgetting the general." Thanks very much indeed for watching. Have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow. See you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.